With the Senate voting to archive the impeachment complaint, legal experts are weighing in on its constitutional implications. And for that, we are now joined by former VP President and constitutional law expert, Atty. Domingo Cayosa. Magandang umaga po sa inyo.
Good morning, Gretchen. Magandang umaga sa nanonood na nakikinig sa iyong programa.
Ang unang-unang tanong ko po sa inyo, no, after hours of debate, ano po ba yung pagkakaiba talaga ng pagte-table sa pag-archive? Kasi dahil, going through the whole process, syempre nagsimula po ito sa motion to dismiss ni Senator Marcoleta, citing the Supreme Court's ruling on unconstitutionality and the failure to adhere to due process, saying hilaw po itong sinaing. And then, ito po ay na-amend, naging motion to archive. That was a motion by Senator Villanueva because the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction. And it was null and void. The articles of impeachment were null and void ab initio. But the other recourse was from Senator Soto with a motion to table the dismissal, which became a motion to archive. So sa inyong pananaw, sa dalawang recourse na po yan, may pagkakaiba po ba yun?
Yes, may pagkakaiba. Yung motion to table, para bang hihintayin lang muna nila na ma-resolve yung more basic or more fundamental issues at hand. Yun nga yung decision ng Supreme Court. So it's much easier to go back to the main motion kung na-table lang yan. Yung archive kasi, they resolve it already and put it on record, but it stays there. It's not as easy to revive it. Theoretically, as the Senate President said, well, they can revive that in case the Supreme Court changes its mind and reverses itself. But that's easier said than done. Still, that was not the revival, in case the Supreme Court would reverse itself, was not included in the final motion. It was simply to archive. And as Senator Soto has said, and even Senator Alan Cayetano, it is practically good as dead. So, the other one, if we look very closely at the current decision of the Supreme Court, ang sinabi nila doon, if you don't act on it or you archive it, it is deemed terminated. So that would already be the impeachment case for the year. So knowing this, kung sakasakali nga na mag-reverse ang Supreme Court, suntok sa buwan yan, but kung mangyari, at there is an attempt to revive what was already archived, sasabihin naman yung respondent, sabi ng Supreme Court, pag na-archive, deemed terminated na. Yan na yung first impeachment case. Maghintay kayo for another year. So these are the nuances na hindi malinaw o hindi masyadong naipaliwanag dun sa mga nakikinig. But we have to respect it. These are politicians. It's their call.
Okay. Kanina nakikinig po ko ng programa ni Ted Filon, no? Parang hinalintulad niya po ito sa isang bangkay na hindi mo muna nilibing, pero parang nilagay mo muna sa freezer para sakasakaling magbaliktad yung desisyon, pwede mo pang ilabas. Pero, I mean, do you think that it is as good as dead? What are the chances of the Supreme Court reversing its ruling? Because Senator Marcoleta was saying or challenging people on that floor to name cases where the Supreme Court voted unanimously and then changed its mind. Meron po ba kayo naaalala na may mga ganong instance?
Well, siguro siya, he said in his 40 years as litigation lawyer, wala siyang alam na ganon. But kami, we know there are a number of Supreme Court cases, more recent and even in the distant past, binaliktad ng Supreme Court ang sarili nila. So, most lawyers know that. Even the Supreme Court acknowledges it is not infallible. And every now and then, they reverse themselves. Sometimes over a number of years, sometimes just a number of months. So, meron pa ngang mga accusation na flip-flopping decision, di ba? So, it's a fact. It may be a long shot, but it's a possibility.
There's always room for the DSSC to act another way than expected, right? But I want to go to the decision of the Supreme Court, the 97-page decision. What are your thoughts on, first of all, the facts involved in the case? Because meron din pong kahapon, may statement po yung ABS-CBN, and it clarified that it never said in any article that the House of Representatives transmitted the articles of impeachment to the Senate without a plenary vote. So nilinaw po yan dahil sinight po ng Supreme Court decision itong ABS-CBN article. So paano po pag ganun, pag mali yung mga facts in the decision itself?
Well, kung mali yung mga facts, maari at malamang magkakamali yung logic mo at saka yung decision mo. And that's why it's good that you tinutumbok mo yon. Because we consider that the Supreme Court can change its mind on policy matters, jurisprudence. Wala namang problema yan. It happens. Poder nila yan, di ba? As a matter of fact, they correct themselves, they change themselves every now and then. But whether you're the Supreme Court or any kind of court, dapat hindi ka nagkakamali. Dapat hindi mo nami-misappreciate o nami-misrepresent yung facts. Kasi black is black, white is white dapat yan eh. You should not commit an error. So that's very basic. That's where may problema dito. And we hope that the Supreme Court will review it again, especially in the light of all this, yung records ng House of Representatives, malinaw naman na dumaan yan sa proseso. Present naman sa plenaryo yung fourth complaint, yung resolution, yung sinasabing dinelay nila, inupuan nila. Ngayon, malinaw din na they acted on it within 10 calendar days. So yung mga sinasabi, now, the worst thing is yung sinasite nilang ABS-CBN, sinasabi nga, wala kaming sinabing ganyan, hindi ganyan yung ibig sabihin. So, at the very least, they should look at this. But and if and when you are wrong, di ba, Gretchen, the highest form of integrity is you correct yourself.
Doesn't it give the impression na medyo minadali po itong decision? Dahil nga ho, yung pagsinsin do sa facts parang kulang pa eh. Kung magkakamali po sila sa ganong bagay, I mean, doesn't it give that kind of impression that this was hasty on the part of the Supreme Court, the court of last resort? And does this happen often to your knowledge and to your experience watching cases go by?
Well, we hope that, and we wish that the Supreme Court resolves cases fast enough because in our country, it is a given fact and statistically, talaga masyadong mabagal ang mga pagdesisyon ng mga korte. There's very slow pace of justice in our country. But having said that, ito kasi hindi ordinaryong kaso ito, Gretchen. It has, as they say, transcendental importance. It will impact not only in this case, but the future workings of different branches of government. At ito usaping korupsyon. Ito usaping accountability of high public official. So considering the controversy, the parties involved, and the nature of the case, maaaring makita natin, relative to other similar cases, masyadong minadali. Hindi na sila nangonsulta sa mga eksperto, hindi na sila nag-oral argument, at nagulantang na lang tayo. Sa matter of days, they were able to resolve after the submission of the House of Representatives at nagulantang lang tayo. Plus, sinabayan pa na kahit hindi pa ito final, immediately executory na. So, I could understand why many are raising at the very least eyebrows dito. Saka, pina-question nila. It could have been done better.
And speaking of those questioning the Supreme Court ruling, a group of lawyers, academics, and citizens led by former Justice Antonio Carpio and Conchita Carpio Morales have submitted to the Supreme Court a status quo petition or status quo ante order to request the Supreme Court na maghinay-hinay muna, mag-stop-stop muna, and kumbaga parang aralin ito ulit at ilagay sa debate. To which I think the Supreme Court responded to na ni-reiterate niya this was immediately executory. But this is not final, right? I mean, your thoughts on that exchange?
It's within the discretion of the Supreme Court to keep maintain or to direct that its decision, even if not yet final, is immediately executory. But this is under exceptional circumstances. Mas lalong nagtataka ang taong bayan o yung nakakaalam ng mga nuances of constitutional law and the proceedings of the Supreme Court na bakit nyo minadali ito? Alam naman nila at alam natin na at hindi pa final. So it's just a question of a matter of a few days, which is all controlled by the Supreme Court when they will resolve the MR. Pero reiterate ulit yung immediately executory ito. Sinabi na nila yung nauna So doon makikita mo na ano ba ang gustong mangyari ng Supreme Court dito. So are they telegraphing something or they just want the senators to understand what they already plainly said at the very start. So that again, nag-speculate ang mga nakakaalam, pinagmumulan uli ng kanilang mga issues. But there's still hope. It may be suntok sa buwan, but as pointed out by one of the senators and all lawyers know, there have been instances where the Supreme Court reversed itself, even in a unanimous decision. So we continue to pray, and for those who are advocating for the impeachment process to continue, i-focus natin ngayon sa Supreme. Balik tayo sa Supreme Court. Kumbaga, bumalik din yung bola and we hope that in due time, after considering everything, and this time doing it better, ma-resolve nila one way or the other.
Regarding the Supreme Court ruling, there was another debate on operative facts because in that decision, it seems that Supreme Court also changed what was required for an impeachment complaint to be declared as legal and valid, right? For example, yung pag-submit at saka yung pag-present ng evidence, may argument po doon na dapat kung may pagbabago, ito ay applied prospectively at hindi regressively. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, paano nga po ba pag may binago yung Supreme Court sa kanyang procedure and ruling, what happens to the other cases in retrospect that have been based on previous Supreme Court cases and jurisprudence?
Well, yung doctrine of operative fact, yung bang magbaguhin mo yung rules, dapat prospective yun, huwag mong i-apply retroactively. That's an embodiment of the clear fairness rule. Which, whether it's the Supreme Court or anybody, kahit sa basketball yan, ganun di ba? So, fairness, basic fairness. Doon, we cannot argue against yung puna ng marami. Of course, if you look at so many decisions of the Supreme Court, there were exceptional cases where they did not make that applicable. Pero dito, malinaw ho kasi. At hindi lang ang kanilang pinapalitan yung ordinaryong kontrata o yung mga private interests. These are public interests. These are constitutional bodies with constituent powers. So, matindi ang puna dyan. Pangalawa, if you look at it also, the Supreme Court also added the requirement na kahit yung express mode, the third mode of initiating an impeachment complaint, which is present it to the plenary and they vote on it, sinasabi ngayon ng Supreme Court, kahit doon, dapat bigyan mo rin ng pagkakataon yung respondent na mag-explain at sumagot. Wala yun sa konstitusyon Pag ganun ang pamamaraan, you leave it to the Senate, and it's in the Senate where the respondent has to answer. In this particular case, the Senate Impeachment Court has assumed jurisdiction, it has convened, and pinasagot na. Sumagot na nga ang Vice President. That's where the due process is. Hindi pa kasama dito yung sinasabi na they are harking on due process of law. It refers to life, liberty, and property. Public office is not life, liberty, or your property. You're not entitled to it. It's an office of public trust. So, mukhang nakalimutan nila yon So, matindi yung puna, but at least now they have a chance to revisit their ruling.
One thing is for sure, meron pa pong chance na mag-resurrect ito kahit patay na.
Yes, of course, all of this worry, speculation, if there's political will, the senators are politicians, di ba? Kahit sa totoo lang, kahit mag-reverse ang Supreme Court at sabihin, tama naman pala yun. Kung ayaw talaga ng mga senador, there's
Totoo.
not much we can do about it.
And they could also not follow the Supreme Court ruling, right? They choose not to follow because there have been instances of that. Okay, maraming
Because-
salamat po sa inyo, Attorney, for joining us today and helping us have some clarity over those hours of debate on the Senate plenary floor. We have Attorney Domingo Cayosa, again, a constitutional law expert and from IBP.